Welcome, Justin and Bhante Sujato. There's obviously a lot of questions coming forward, but I just wanted to start by thanking you for sharing your time, but also asking you, do you as a progressive Buddhist feel supported by the Buddhist community? Do you feel that your views are mainstream? Do you feel we're taking sufficient action to combat the pressing issues of climate crisis, racism, poverty, and gender inequality? And what can we as Buddhists do to support these issues more? Is it Buddhist to be socially engaged?
I'll let you go first, Bhante, if you'd like.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Okay, I'm on, you can hear me? Is that good?
Yes.
Can you go through those questions one at a time?
Do you feel supported as a progressive Buddhist by other Buddhists? Do you feel your views are mainstream?
No. I mean, I'm as a monk and as a practitioner and a Dhamma teacher, then yes, of course, I'm supported by the Buddhist community very generously. So there's not a complaint about that. But in terms of being somebody who's been advocating for progressive ideas for a long time, I still feel that it's very kind of. I often feel like it's like, well, we just kind of put up with those things. Sujato is sort of going on again about how the evils of capitalism, and I wish he'd just talk about meditation, and so we can just be happy and go home. And look, I get it, right? I know, right? People come along, they want to do some meditation, and we'll do some nice meditation. We go home and we feel happy, and that's great, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. But the problem is that that depends on so many things, and all of those things they're areas that we need to apply our Dhamma principles to as well. So this is why I sometimes feel it's difficult I feel like I have to sort of push against to sort of create a space where it's going to be possible to talk about these things. And I don't know how to do it. Like, we don't have examples of how to do it. We just make it up as we go along. And if someone wants to say, you shouldn't talk like that, you shouldn't do that, I'm like, yeah, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so that's the first question. Second question was?
Do you feel we are taking sufficient action to combat the pressing issues of climate crisis, racism, poverty, and gender inequality?
Oh God, no.
And how can we support these issues?
Make good trouble.
Okay. Do you think is there, Bhante, you know a lot about the suttas. Is there a precedent in the suttas to be socially engaged, to actually act in the world, to implement these teachings so that they're not just empty platitudes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the Buddha was not big on empty platitudes, right? So he definitely did want things. I mean, the Buddha had his own way of doing things, and there's a time and a place and a context. And there's been quite a lot of work done in that area. But just I think there was a book by Bhikkhu Bodhi wrote something on that not so long ago, and there's a number of other people who've written on that. But one sort of for me is very striking. Well, no, two suttas I should say for me are very striking in that regard. Number one is the Kuttadanta Sutta in the Digha Nikaya, where the Buddha is asked to do a sacrifice. Sorry, not the Buddha. It's a story of the past, and the king in that time is asking about doing a sacrifice, and the recommendation is that rather than killing animals and doing all of these harmful things for a sacrifice, why don't we look at what the actual problems are? We look at the poverty, we look at the social unrest, you look at the crime, and you say, why are these things? Well, it's because people don't have enough to eat, they don't have the resources, they don't have the needs that they have. So the king, rather than wasting their money doing ridiculous things, should be spending his resources to actually help his people and to address the causes of the poverty and the crime and so on that are creating the issues. Essentially the same doctrine for which Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was called an effing bitch recently in the steps of the American Congress, that we should address the causes of these things. So this is found in the suttas. The other one which is found in the suttas is Nyaganya Sutta, where the Buddha talks about the interconnection between human evolution, moral evolution, and the environment, and about how we co-evolve together with the environment and in the environment, and how our choices create the world in which we live. These two things, I think, are really critical. And that contains a lot of really interesting things on things like, say, just the nature of property and the nature of like the whole idea of dividing pieces of land and claiming ownership over them, which is a very kind of strange thing when you come to think of it. Aboriginals lived in Australia for 50,000 years without doing that, and they did okay.
Thanks, Bhante. Justin, I'll put the same question to you. Do you feel supported by the progressive Buddhist community? Do you feel we're taking sufficient action to combat the pressing issues of climate crisis, racism, poverty, and gender inequality?
Thank you. I feel relatively supported. I feel like there's a spectrum of activism and work toward progress. And I think there are people further ahead than me and a lot of people behind. So I feel I've developed enough of a community that I know the people who will support my work. And I know that there are other people out there trying to do other progressive work in these issues. As a community, I, of course, don't think we're doing enough. I think we can be doing a lot more. And I think just gatherings like this represent an important step. We're all here together, thinking about talking about the same issues. How can we make this a more regular part of our lives? And in terms of how do we do that more, it's going to be up to each of us to think about our own kind of individual situation. One of the aspects of Buddhist economics I didn't get into was the need for kind of localized answers to these global questions. And I'm very lucky to have just moved back to my home state in Montana, and am very excited to get engaged in local political issues and local discussions about how to solve the problems that are here. And the problems and the ways that you can all contribute, I think, are going to depend on where you are in the world. I think it all has to turn toward these principles I talked about in terms of your own moral cultivation, our own work to let go of our urge to consume, and that's going to free up time for this this activity. But how exactly we do that is going to be very individual and particular.
Thanks, Justin. I think you made a really valuable point about the need to invest more in community and a connection with the planet and, you know, the rivers and the trees. And it can sound kind of, I don't know, a bit new agey, but actually I think under capitalism, a lot of us feel alone because there is an emphasis on a person's value being in how much they consume and how much they earn. And sometimes just the rat race of struggling to survive and getting enough and feeling insecure because there's nothing to fall back on can be really hard and can isolate people. Can, you know, people who would perhaps, if they felt they had enough, would work together for meaningful change, you know. And I think that can divide us, you know. So I think part of the change that needs to happen is building beloved community, building bridges between when we realize, you know, okay, there's a teacher over there talking about racism, let's support them, let's be allies, let's elevate Black voices, people of color. There's a teacher over there struggling with inequality, she can't get support, she can't get full ordination, let's raise her voice. There's a Buddhist over there running a soup kitchen, let's promote their cause. You know, if we could come together, because there is this problem in at least Western Buddhism where people are extremely individualistic and they think that their practice consists of coming to a Dharma center, meditating, finding peace, to simply manage and deal with the horrors of the stress of their daily life and a sense of meaninglessness that is part of modern existence. Whereas we're not addressing the basic causes of our discontent, you know, and we need to build communication and act and solidarity together to work, as a united front on these issues. Because certainly the right is becoming more and more united. And if we don't vote, if we don't come together, those changes that we want to see won't happen. But to Bhante Sujato, Gabriela Galvez asked a question. She said she's a Native American woman and a Spanish speaker.
Yeah.
She said she's in Washington, D.C., and she feels like, sometimes people pander to white people in America, or she feels she doesn't want to be lumped in with white politicians who are so appalling. And she feels alone, that people out there globally, she doesn't have any allies, even if they're Buddhist, makes her feel isolated without any support. How can we separate American politicians from Americans, stop associating America as only a country of white men, and, kind of give a voice to the people, I guess.
Yeah, look, I don't have answers to all those things, but Gabriella, I hear what you're saying, and I wish I could do more. And I wish that I know that there are a lot of people around who, would be your ally and would stand beside you. And I know that it's hard to not feel alone and not feel lost, but just know that the people here, at least, please, anybody tell me if I'm wrong, but we love you and we support you. So if anybody wants to exclude themselves from that, please speak up. But I think I speak for everyone, and we say that we don't want you to feel alone. And that feeling, I feel it. I feel it a lot. I mean, I'm at the apex of privilege. I'm very well aware of that, right? I'm a cisgender white male. I've got everything that I could possibly want, but I feel alone as well. And so when that happens to me, and this is what I think, well, imagine what it feels like for others who don't have those privileges that I have. So, I like I said in my talk, I don't want to come across like I've got all the answers, because I don't. I really don't. Or what I can do maybe is just offer an observation, which is that my observation would be that once you are within a certain structure, be it a Sangha structure, a Dhamma organization, a political structure, an organization, once you're within that structure, it's really hard to change the culture of that particular organization or that particular group. And I always remember something that Ajahn Chah used to tell his monks, like when they would go out from the monastery, and then frequently they would be asked to go and, like, there's a lot of empty monasteries in Thailand, so you'd be asked to go and stay in a monastery and take it over and run it and so on. And he would always say, don't do that. If you want to start something yourself, and don't try to move into somebody else's monastery and think we can make this a better place. Because you just get caught up in all of those things. And this is something that I've seen, and I've found very disappointing in my life, is that I've seen where, you take a step forward, 2 steps forward, but then that power of the patriarchy and the power of the tradition just drags you back again, and it feels like all of your work has just been lost. So I would always encourage people to have the courage to step forward and start something yourself. You make your own movement, your own group, your own organization, bring people together in your way, look to what other people are doing, and do the other thing. Yeah. Go on. Yeah.
I can't tell a Native American woman how to. I think they probably know better than us. And actually, it's time for Indigenous people to lead. Because they're the leaders in terms of how to care for community, how to have a sustainable economy. I think they actually have the answers. And Gabriella, we should be probably following your lead on this. Absolutely. But I think as we know, climate change is going to impact society. It's going to impact the economy, and food growth and so forth. I think maybe we have to come back to grassroots levels in terms of backing each other up and having each other's back, you know, and looking at how could I volunteer 2 days a month at a soup kitchen? How can I create a food bank with my friends, an organic vegetable collective? How can we offer each other emotional support? Because we all feel like we're alone, and in fact we're not. It's an illusion created to make us feel fearful and be compliant in an unjust system. So if we want to see a difference, we have to, you know, come together in practical ways, you know. I mean, a monastery, like people think we're individualistic as Buddhists, but actually if you look in Asia and traditional Buddhist communities, the monastery was a social justice and community center. The older people had something to do, a place, you know, to purify their minds and find peace and find companionship. The people who are unemployed could come and volunteer in the kitchen and serve the monks and get a meal. And if they were, you know, the orphan children would be ordained. I'm not saying child monks is a great solution, but that was what that society did. So a monastery was always a place of sacredness for the whole community. And community has always been part of Buddhist life. It's not just a case that Buddhism is for the individual. And it's our approach in seeking social justice as an individual and not as a community that has been part of our weakness. Anyway, Bhante, another question is, how can we use the punya, kirya, vatu, grounds of moral activity to better engage in community from the grassroots?
Okay. That's quite a general question. That's also from Gabriella. Gabriella, do you want to speak to that question? Like why particularly were you looking at that particular framework for that?
If you can type in the chat bar, Gabriella.
Gabriella can't talk, can she?
It's a bit difficult. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to make the connections in my mind. Gabriella, can I maybe skip that question because I honestly don't have an answer that's ready in my mind for that. Maybe we can go on for something else, and I'll see if I can come back to it, or else I'll reach out to you again with that. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask a question to Justin now.
Yeah, go
on. So, aren't our current social issues driven by hate, greed, and delusion? Is it wise to use these things to try and affect change? It feels like a very slippery slope.
Can you, I guess, elaborate on that using greed, hatred, and delusion? I guess I don't understand the question.
I'm not sure exactly what Alex meant by that. I think
perhaps Alex was responding to the fact that when Justin began his talk, that you mentioned that not all kinds of greed and hate were bad. So is that right, Alex? You can nod if that's what you're right. Okay, there you go.
Okay, so yeah, this is, as I mentioned, one of the kind of difficulties in translating Buddhism. Greed and desire, there's a selfish greed, which I think consumerism panders to and keeps us on the wheel of consumption and anger and delusion and samsara. But there's also positive striving in Buddhism toward enlightenment, toward helping others. So we can talk about having a desire to gain enlightenment. It's Buddhism, a kind of maybe an old trope is that Buddhists try to be apathetic. And that's absolutely never historically been the case. Buddhists have always been kind of energetic and engaged. So it's not about eliminating desires to do good or cultivate oneself. And the same with anger, as a lot of people in radical and progressive Buddhism have talked about. A very simplistic version of Buddhism says all anger is bad and to be eradicated. And I think a lot of us misinterpret that to think we should push away our anger and maybe even not acknowledge our feelings. And historically, Buddhism has always had teachings on wrath and engaging with the problem side of society and being very upfront about that. And even the Buddha at times looks angry when he leaves his monks. I think it's because they were making too much noise at one time. After his enlightenment, shouldn't he be more compassionate with them? But no, it seems like he's a little upset or angry because they are actually failing in living up to their standards. And throughout Buddhist history, there have been teachings like this where teachers have been willing to be a bit forceful, and wrathful is usually the term used, rather than angry necessarily. So there is that engagement with emotions in Buddhism. So we have to be careful when, at least starting out, when we learn that we should be eradicating our anger and our greed, that or our desires, that there are certain things we can and rightly should be angry about in the world today, and eliminating racism, sexism, poverty, and so on are among them.
Thanks for saying that, Justin, that compassion can be fierce and doesn't mean that you're passive or ineffective in turning a blind eye to injustice, because justice is how love looks in public. So another question.
Hang on.
Oh,
So
okay.
sorry, can you repeat that last saying?
Justice is how love looks in public.
Oh, justice is how love looks in public. Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you said injustice, and I was just like, hang on. Oh, yeah, that's nice. Hang on, no. Just checking. Okay, fine.
No. Okay, so somebody said, Justin, earlier you mentioned overpopulation in addition to overconsumption. Neo-Malthusian ideas of overpopulation have fallen out of favor and are generally considered to be more racist views in more recent social science and critical literature. For instance, a country may have 3 times as many people as the US, but we consume 100 times as much per capita. Would you add any thoughts to that evolution of thought, Justin?
Yeah, I'd start by agreeing 100%. I think Rita Gross's essay puts those two together, and I think for myself and others, especially in westernized countries, we can take the overpopulation aspect on ourselves as well. I have 1 child, and I think very seriously about having another and what effect that would have on the planet. I don't necessarily need to turn that toward developing nations where people in general have more children. And I would use that kind of comparison to temper down people who say that the population is too great, or that is the problem, that overpopulation is the sole problem. It's actually consumption and overpopulation. And absolutely, if anybody is going to take that truth and focus it on developing nations or minorities, the right thing to do is turn that back on people in developed countries, especially people who have wealth and power to consume far more than people in developing countries, and to try to keep those two in balance. So I agree that the Malthusian emphasis has been discredited. I think there is still truth to the fact that the more children, especially somebody like me, has, the more tax we're going to put on the planet, environmentally and economically. So that's something I still need to think about, and I think others in especially developed countries need to think about a lot more.
Thanks for that. I think it's really... go ahead.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry, just to follow on from that, there was a recent study, maybe only last week or a couple of weeks ago, that has challenged much of the conventional UN projections on population growth, and they argue very strongly that we are headed towards a shrinking population in the globe very soon, and that especially countries like China will be shrinking their population, and there'll be major shifts. As a general rule, in Africa, the population will increase and much of the rest of the world will decrease, and that the real problem we'll be facing will be caring for the elderly in that world of a shrinking population, and that the structural problem of that will be that traditionally that's been solved through immigration, but we won't be able to do it anymore because it'll be too widespread, and that we won't be able to get the immigration that we need to be able to care for the elderly. But anyway, this was a paper that came out just a couple of weeks ago. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've spent 10 years in an Indian slum, and I can say that population does matter, because if people are too crowded in together and they can't get enough resources, they don't have quality of life, and life becomes cheap.
Right.
So I would say it's still a factor, but definitely people in developed countries need to consume less.
Sorry. So again, sorry to interrupt, but just to say that, and I know that you know this very well, so I'm just making sure that it's actually mentioned, is that the number one way of addressing overpopulation is through education and support of women.
That is true. Yeah, especially sponsoring girl children, and we run a charity in India called Bodhicitta Foundation that sponsors that benefits around 2,000 Indian people per year, specifically women and children. But Justin, I just wanted to say that I think your points about a Buddhist economy or an ethical economy are really important. And as we live on a planet of finite resources, it's probably important to start redefining how we view success and what we view as abundance, rather than I know that in Indigenous and Native American cultures, they actually respect a person who gives more away and who benefits others, rather than a person who endlessly hoards wealth while other people starve. And I think that's a kind of a critical difference between, more traditional societies where everybody in the community is cared for, and a simple, sustainable economy versus a capitalist one where it's endless growth and only people who are financially productive are valued or respected. So everybody's seeking that as a way to be valued as a member of society. Maybe we need to redefine that idea of what a successful person is, what abundance is, and invest in each other instead of things. So Bhante, Sujato, Cynthia asked a question. She said, what do you think needs to happen to see moral values become a cultural reality?
Right. Okay, here we go. Number one, I don't know. So, but anyway, what I think is, number one, we have to be able to tell the truth. We just have to be able to say it. And even if people don't like us for it, even if we get it wrong, even if we say it the wrong way, we can't not tell the truth until we figured out the right way to say everything all the time. You just have to say it and do the best. And if you stuff up, fine, say I'm sorry and do it better the next time. So the number one is we have to live with that integrity, and we have to be able to say what is what. The other thing which I would point to there is that in recent years we have this this kind of what do you call it? Like an idea, or a sort of a cultural idea of what they call virtue signaling. So the idea of virtue signaling is that it's a critique of people who sort of advertise the fact that they are saying good things and so on, as a way of just making themselves look good on social media. And obviously, hypocrisy is no new thing in morality. But I think it's really critical to understand that virtue signaling is the foundation of all morality. Virtue signaling is the foundation of all morality. If we do not signal our virtue, we can't communicate that. That's how it's communicated. When people see someone does something good and they signal the fact that they've done good, that's what gets other people to do it. This is what the French philosopher, what was his name? French Catholic philosopher, I can't remember his name. He talks about the triangulation of morality, the triangulation of virtue. We see what somebody else does, and that's why we do that. That's how morality grows. So when people criticize virtue signaling, make no mistake, they know this. What they are trying to do is to undermine the very existence of morality itself. that's why virtue signaling is bad, right? But vice signaling is fine. Yeah. There's no word, the vice signaling isn't a thing, right? That's not something people will criticize you for, because that's fine. Virtue signaling is wrong. So never, and this is something, if you look in the Buddhist tradition, Buddhists have never had a problem with this. Look, I went down to the monastery and gave dana today. Oh, that's really good. You know, yes, you should be signaling your virtue. You should be putting it forward and being proud of it. You should be saying, I did this good thing, and why don't you do it as well? This is how morality grows. Don't be ashamed of it.
Out and proud with your dana.
Absolutely.
So, Bhante, you were involved about a decade back with helping, although the reviving of the full ordination for nuns was already in progress earlier from other senior nuns. You and Ajahn Brahms lent your monastery, your voices to the cause, and performed an ordination against the approval of people in Thailand, and you received a lot of flack for that. And you also tried to start one of the first bhikkhuni monasteries in Australia for women. Do you think that women, especially nuns, have, you know, the equality they need? What actually made you care about the plight of women, seeing as you were in a comfortable monastery where you had all your needs met? What can you say about this issue?
Okay, well, just to be clear, and I know that we've had this conversation before, but just to be clear that it's not we weren't doing the first first bhikkhuni thing in Australia. There's been many Taiwanese, Vietnamese, even Tibetans that had bhikkhuni ordinations well before we had done. So we were doing the first in the Theravadan tradition in Australia, not the first in Theravadan internationally, but the first in Theravada tradition in Australia. What was it that made me do it? Honestly, compassion, having some empathy for the suffering of others. I can tell you about the time that I talked to my sister, and I remember that at the back of the Dharmasala in Bodhinyana, and she came to visit one day. This is in Perth, and it's sort of been the late 90s, and she just said just quietly that she didn't feel like that she belonged to or fit into any particular religion these days, because none of them really gave women a fair go. And I'm like, that's not good, is it? It's not right. And there've been some examples. There are many examples in Wat Nanachat, where I originally ordained, in the Western monastery in Thailand, and be it a number of strong women who lived in the women's quarters there. And so I had some kind of awareness of what was happening. Also, an important thing was my time in Malaysia. I spent over a year in Ipoh, and seeing the really strong practice in the Chinese traditions of the bhikkhunis, and the lay women as well, who were doing such incredible meditation and practice, and just seeing that they had no opportunity for ordination. Little known fact is that I wanted to make the place I was staying at in Malaysia, the Sukawana, I wanted to make that into a bhikkhuni monastery while I was there. Unfortunately, that never worked out. So yes, yeah.
Thanks,
Bhante.
So Justin, somebody has asked, can you speak about the framework of gift economic practices by many indigenous communities as a possible form of Buddhist economics?
I don't think I can speak too much about the framework for indigenous communities, because I don't know enough about them. But I do think giving and being very local can serve as an important basis for Buddhist economics, and thinkers have written about that. And one thing that did come to mind for me was I don't know if many of you are familiar with Buy Nothing groups. This is something that started outside of Seattle, Washington, on Facebook, and They're meant to be hyper local, no more than 1,000 people in a group, and based in communities. And it is based on the philosophy of buying nothing. And so you can ask for things or you can just give them away. And it's a way to meet community members, like people that physically live around you, and get to know your community. And I think things like that in the contemporary age can be incorporated into our Buddhist ethos. And certainly this idea of, the abundance of stuff that many of us have, and finding ways to give what we don't need, and trust also that our community can, give us the things that we do need. And I think that's a big step for a lot of us to take, and it will rely on having these community structures. So again, I don't know the particular Native American or indigenous formats for this, but if they can be translated into, your situation and your situation, I think any kind of giving economy or gift economy is absolutely wonderful. And that's how Buddhism has flourished. Certainly Theravada Buddhism for 2,500 years is this monastic lay people gift economy. So any kind of move in that direction, I think is very important and helpful.
Thanks, Justin. So Justin, you also facilitate a chat room called Progressive Buddhism, where wonderful articles are posted about progressive issues in Buddhism from a wide variety of sources. How do you keep that as a safe space for activists so that they don't get trolled or that their voices are silenced?
I think it's a balancing act, and we have tried to create more community rules as time has gone on, and it's really kind of on a case-by-case basis of how the discussion is going, and often simply asking for an end of a conversation when two people start going at each other directly, and there's no longer a community discussion happening, and asking that to be set aside. I think a lot of online communication tends toward propping up ego, and then people defending their egos rather than the points of their conversation. And maybe both sides have good points, but now their egos are just talking, and it's better to ask for a pause and invite the conversants to speak off the site. And often when people get in these one-on-one conversations, they can see each other a lot better and see each other's ideas better than in a forum where a lot of people are watching, and it becomes almost a spectator sport of ideas. And honestly, that is very taxing in online communities, is seeing people I know are good people going after each other, nitpicking one another and attacking and diving into ad hominem attacks, and just losing the thread of a possibly very good conversation. So I don't think I've got any particular solution or any silver bullet for solving that, but I think just trying to be responsive and asking for a calming down or a calming of the conversation at times is what's needed.
Do you think there could be a case there where it's like Bhante said, the illusion of equality, when actually, for example, a white person is gaslighting or trolling a person of color, or a woman is being trolled by a man, or someone's lived experience as an oppressed person, for example, a marginalized nun or something, and someone saying, no, this is not your right to speak this way, like questioning their lived experience, someone with more privilege. I mean, is that aiding the progressive discussion, or is that just kind of letting the troll win? When do you silence it and when do you keep it going?
Again, I can't give like any general right answer. I think I've used in that particular forum, I've actually kicked out several people. I think, exclusively white males in, Western countries, Caucasian white males, because they were, doing head-to-head combat with people in ways that was not productive again and again. And I think that is usually the criteria for me, just saying, okay, you need to, if you can't listen to people from oppressed populations, then you're not welcome here. And that has led me to remove some of those people and hopefully avoiding this false equivalency. It's very hard to tell on a case-by-case basis what a particular individual's background is in a particular discussion. So sometimes it's just, I do have to ask, both sides to be, calm down. Think of Joe Biden and Donald Trump yelling at each other. At some point, you might have to just say, okay, both of you, be quiet. We'll have to, you take this conversation somewhere else, without saying like that necessarily makes you equal in every possible way, but that particular conversation might not be beneficial.
Okay. So, like, moving on to the situation of the polarization in America, between the left and the right, this is another difficult issue, but there is such a very, more than ever it seems, left and right-wing Americans are polarized. Is there a way that we can work together, or find a solution? What do you think can be done there? It's very conflict ridden, and there's a lot of misinformation on both sides, more probably exacerbated by social media, and false news sources. Although Trump seems to think that reputable news sources are fake news. So as a journalist, what would you say to that?
I think it's very difficult, and I think we all have our work cut out for us in the next few months to hold up sources of truth and present them to the world. As a cis white male, I have the privilege of being able to maybe reach out to and connect more with people further on the right and try to convince them of some truths that they simply won't listen to a woman or a person of color. So part of that is kind of my own particular duty in this, is trying to reach out to some of those folks more. But still, I spend more of my effort kind of seeking out voices of the oppressed and trying to hold them up again more and more. But a lot of work. It's a lot of work, yeah.
I'm sure it is. I find... Sorry, go, Bhante.
No.
I find as an activist, especially as a woman who speaks about abuse and patriarchy and Buddhism, I do get a lot of trolling. And I found that some chat rooms are not safe spaces for activists to speak, because in the end the trolls win and you both get silenced. So I really appreciate, Justin, you giving a voice to people with less privilege. And there, there's this idea of freedom of speech, that everybody should be able to speak. But I think this is a really contentious point too amongst progressives, but if we give free rein to hate speech, it can derail the conversation. So like in my own chat room, I tend to have quite strict rules about no homophobia, no sexism. And when somebody is trolling a person or gaslighting a person with less privilege, they get one warning and they're out. Yeah. So Bhante, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, just to all of those things, I won't go on too much because that will go on, but just to say, you started out talking about left and right, and the thing that's really sort of been striking me recently, it's not about left and right anymore. It's about life and death. And it's about, do people survive? Do we make it through the next week? Do we make it through the next year? Do we have a planet that we can actually live on? That's our choice.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot at stake. And that's, I guess, I mean, I think another factor that I'm also guilty of is that in the left, or, people who are committed to believing in climate change and so forth, we allow small issues to divide us, or this culture, call out culture of cancel culture of just, you know, if somebody does something wrong, we can completely write them off as a human being. So there is a need for us to combine on critical issues, even if we don't agree on everything. So Bhante, somebody, to a lighter question, somebody said, how can we use the Buddha's teachings to help people move from preoccupation with material things and entertainment to appreciation and care for nature, for endangered species, for their local bush and beaches, open their heart to a love of the wider world? How can people shift their values from human-made things to the natural world? You know, more than a kind of fake world of entertainment and so forth.
How do we do that? Well, no, it's, I mean, sure. I mean, it's a very general question. I mean, the whole of Buddhism is about all of those things. So I could start at the beginning, but I'm not kind of sure. I mean, maybe I'll circle back to Gabriella's question earlier. She talked about the Punyakiriya Watu, and that the foundation of that is the idea of generosity as the start of the spiritual path, and that's sort of come up a bit in some of the other answers as well, the question of generosity. And, you know, generosity is interesting. I mean, we had a case on our forum intersecting with the question of right speech online about a year ago or so, where somebody who was a very committed American Buddhist, but absolutely loathed the whole idea of generosity, right? They thought I was a fraud, that my livelihood must be based on my systematic lying to people by telling them you're going to go to heaven if you give me food, right? That's what they assumed that what I did was, okay? And the whole idea of generosity was intrinsically a lie and was morally inferior to the capitalist approach. This is a committed Buddhist who kept on pushing these ideas on our forum. Eventually we had to ban him, or we had to leave, or whatever. So, but generosity is really threatening. It's really powerful if we have this idea that actually we don't own stuff, but we are granted the privilege of being able to use stuff, and we should share it. Like, it doesn't belong to us in the first place. And the idea that giving is the foundation. And in the Sangha, monastic Sangha, our whole livelihood is based on giving. We never ask for things. Everything is just given. My whole life for the last 25 years, I've like literally never owned any money for 25 years. And I've never done anything for money or anything like that. I can count on, I think, 2 fingers the times that I've actually touched money in the last 25 years. I think the last time I actually spent money was when I was on a train platform, and the little old lady on the platform couldn't put her dollar coin into the ticket machine, and so I had to do it for her. So that was the last time that I actually used money. And so we're very lucky that we managed to live, and we can show that it is actually possible to live even in this world as we have it today, and not use money at all. I'm really interested, Justin, in that buy nothing movement. That sounds terrific. And, you know, I think that we need to start with doing these more kind of radical steps forward. Because, see, the thing is, we've been sold a lie. We've been sold a lie that infinite consumption is normal, that infinite economic growth is normal, that capitalism is inevitable, that the way this thing is just somehow some kind of natural growth. That's how it is. It's not the way things are. It's the way people have made it. And specifically, it's the way that the rich have made it, because it benefits them. And we can live in all kinds of other ways. And this is something that I've sort of noticed ever since I was a student, and I read a little bit of anthropology at the time. And one of the things that really struck me was, if you look at like tribal societies around the world, how incredibly diverse they are. And if we look at it from the, you know, from a long way away, it seems like they're very similar, but have so many different customs, different ethics, different marriage ways, all these different ways they have of living. And it shows you that human cultures are actually incredibly adaptable and resilient, that we can create things and change things in all kinds of different ways, the ways that we've seen, and also an infinite number of ways that we haven't seen yet. These things are possible. And there's nothing inevitable about, I mean, these absurdities, the absurdity of the idea of infinite economic growth. I mean, it's just nonsense. And yet it's the foundation of all of our economic thinking. And it's the foundation of all of our responses to climate change. You know, this is one of the big problems, again, the problems that progressives have with climate change. We can't conceive of a solution to climate change that says the plain and obvious fact that the simple, most effective, proven way to address CO2 levels in the environment is to shrink the economy. That's actually the only thing historically that's worked on a global scale. It's happening now. It happened with the global financial crisis. It's the only thing that's actually effectively reduced the amount of CO2 that's being emitted in the short term. And we would like to imagine that everybody can have all of the luxuries and all of the things we've got now without causing any effects. We'd like to have our cake and eat it too. But that's not how the world runs most of the time.
Yeah, perhaps focusing on gross national happiness instead of GDP, as Bhutan does.
Yeah.
And, you know, investing as a sign of wealth, you know, clean rivers, clean mountains, organic food,
right.
You know, investing in community
Yeah.
as a marker of well-being,
yeah.
rather than just how much plastic stuff you can buy from China.
Yeah. Three times as much plastic in the ocean in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
It's a study that came out today.
Right. So
these things are not solved problems at all.
Yeah. I mean, I guess Theravada monks are the original minimalists, and that's extremely admirable. And I always did notice at your community that everybody who turned up received an equal share in whatever there was to receive, you know, which was wonderful.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's also a kind of a sign of privilege that monks do receive more resources than nuns, you know. And,
absolutely, yeah.
And that system of dana is only possible because mostly traditional Buddhists enable that system of dana because they value people meditating, they value preserving the Dharma in that way, and that really hasn't quite caught on as much in my tradition. Like I ordained with 15 people and only myself and one other nun are left. We have about a 80 to 90% disrobing rate, and I've heard stories like of a nun who was living out of the garbage food from the garbage can in one Dharma center, and a monk who was living under the stairs in the Dharma center because they saw him as a waste of money, and he didn't have any money to pay rent. So that was the reality that happens when we don't kind of value the fourfold Sangha. And
I just to, you know, affirm and to reinforce what you just said, you know, this is definitely, you know, it is about valuing the Sangha, and it's also about, more broadly, the role of generosity and the fact that our spiritual life is not just about me and what I can get out of it. And I, you know, not to sort of take a side on whether modern Buddhism or traditional Buddhism is better or whatever, but it's certainly the case that many forms of traditional Buddhism have a better balance in that respect. And also just briefly on that point about the monks getting more stuff than the nuns, interesting to note that this is actually acknowledged by the Buddha in the Vinaya. And so there are rules in the Vinaya that protect the nuns because they would get little, but because of their generosity, they would give away even what little that they had. And so the Buddha made rules saying that the monks had to be cognizant of the fact that the nuns tended to get less things than the monks.
I mean, there's some very deep unconscious patriarchal values imbued in traditional Buddhism,
right.
that nuns and women have to live with, and it has to do with how they're seen and valued and what their spiritual capacity is.
Right.
We often see very commonly that lay women's role as mothers and homemakers and community holders is not valued. You know, that's seen as a less than option, that oh, you know, they're trapped in worldly samsara, whatever. They're trapped there because you don't wash your own plate. So, and you know, women have always been the biggest supporters of Buddhism, you know, and have an innately spiritual nature. And certainly nuns still live with the burden of that patriarchy. But just kind of wrapping up, there are just some comments. Somebody wrote that he or they follow Dr. Ambedkar, who's one of the great humanist reformers of the caste system in India.
Right.
And he said that, you know, in terms of social justice, Dr. Ambedkar said a key factor is in making change is educate, agitate, organize.
Right.
And another person said that they believe that virtue signaling is harmful because it often continues to center on the dominant voices, to focus on appearances rather than real work for systematically marginalized folks. And I guess that's why we would need to lift up the voices of oppressed people and allow them to speak for themselves, rather than kind of showing, oh, look at me, you know, Black Lives Matter, here's my logo. Like, actually, let's put up a post about people of color speaking their truth rather than making it about us, centering on us. And I see that happens very frequently in the amount of kind of pushback, like when you post Black Lives Matter and all these people going hashtag all lives matter, or, you know, when you make a post about you know, another woman who's yet again been murdered by male violence, and making a post saying all lives matter, you know, not all men, you know, and they're literally doing that on the post of a woman who has been murdered. So I guess we have to wrap up. Justin, do you have anything to say in closing?
Just thank you all for being here. I hope this conversation starts something that continues, that we can come back together in the future and share our successes and our many failures in trying to build our common progressive radical Buddhist movement, because we are all in this together, no matter where we are in the world. And, you know, we are interconnected. We have our own work to do, but I just know that feeling the sense of community and seeing all of these faces ahead of me bolsters me and makes me, you know, feel like I can do my practice more strongly, and I can do more and should do more to help the world. And so thank you very much, Ayya Yeshe, Bhante, Sujato, and everybody else.
And thanks for the wonderful work you do as a journalist and as an advocate for progressive Buddhism, because I know you certainly gave my platform a voice, and you're really involved in a lot of wonderful projects. So all the best, and thanks for your time today. Bhante, Sujato, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, sorry.
Right.
Somebody
Would you like to say anything in closing?
No, just thanks so much for the opportunity. Thanks, Ayya. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Damit, and all of the people who are here. And it's been really, really a great opportunity. And just everyone keep being awesome, and just like destroy capitalism and stuff, because that would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So rock on, dude. Venerable dude. So thanks everyone for coming. I hope you all feel a sense of solidarity. You know, I'm gonna make a page. I'm sorry, it's on the evil Facebook, but it's an easy platform that a lot of people have. For if you have any further discussions or questions, if you want to hear about more topics, hopefully we'll do this festival again in the future, and create more platforms for progressive teachers and community to come together for important issues. But in closing, I think it's important to look at what we can actually act on and take away to make a difference. So first of all is build community. Think about, you know, a village of 100 people being emotionally available for each other, volunteering for a food bank or a soup kitchen, volunteering to help raise the voices of people of color and Black Lives Matter, join Extinction Rebellion, inform yourself about, you know, dismantling white heteropatriarchy and white supremacy, you know, elevate the voices of women, you know, start undoing patriarchy and violence within yourself, sponsor a girl in a developing country, plant a vegetable garden, go vegetarian, and do self-care, you know, to cultivate your meditation practice. So thank you and all the best. A reminder to donate so that we can make a donation to Black Lives Matter, and also to offer dana to all of the kind teachers here today, and continue to make these teachings available. And thank you to Yoke Magazine, Bodhicitta Dakini Monastery, and Dharmanet for being our sponsors for this event to happen. Thank you, and all the best.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.